How do you get from a first draft to a finished one? Find out in this video series, starting with genre. Hi, I'm Iris Marsh. I help indie authors with their manuscripts so they can publish with confidence. By the end of this video, you'll have learned the different content genres and how to find the main one in your story. Be sure to stick until the end for a special offer. So, before we dive into how you can find out the genre of your story and why this will help you improve your manuscript, we first have to understand better what genre is and how we can use it. So, what is genre? According to thestorygrid.com, which is a resource I very often use, genre is a label that tells audience members what to expect from our stories. According to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, genre is a category of artistic, musical, or literary composition characterized by a particular style, form, or content. So as you can see, genre is a classification, a sort of box to put your story in. According to some people, this will be restrictive, when actually it opens up a lot of possibilities, because it will give you clarity in what you need to put in your story to make it work, to make it enjoyable for readers, and to have readers turn pages. So genre is a very helpful concept for us. So there's a bit of a difference between market genre and content genre. So market genre is, of course, also part of genre. So this is things like historical fantasy or YA dystopian. So this also gives readers some information about the age group or the setting of the story in terms of realism, or if it's future, past related, or contemporary. But that's not actually what we're interested in when we're analyzing our story. What we want to know is what our content genre is. So what is then content genre? So the content genre defines what is contained in a story and specifically determines the need and value at stake. So value is the important thing here. Value is the key word here, because you want to understand what's at stake, because what's at stake differs depending on the content genre you're writing in. So the content genre is divided into two different sections. You have external content genres and you have internal content genres, which are divided based on the values that are at stake. So the external content genres are action, war, horror, crime, thriller, love, performance, Western, Eastern, and society. So as you can see, for each genre there are different values at stake. So with action is life versus death. I think that was pretty self-explanatory. So the protagonist faces a chance at death within the story. With war, it's about dishonor versus honor. So it's about how you win the war, if you act honorably and you serve your country with honor, or if you have to resort to dishonorable practices. With horror, it's about life versus a fate worse than death. So it's a step more compared to the action story. And with a fate worse than death, you can think about making a deal with the devil, really losing your soul. So that's at stake. Then with crime, it's justice versus injustice, right? So can the protagonist bring the criminal to justice, or take justice into their own hands, like in whatever way, shape, or form you define justice. Then thriller, it's also life versus fate worse than death, just like horror. Only with thriller, it's more related to justice. So the protagonist really wants not just to defeat a certain monster to prevent them from losing their soul in a way, but also they want to defeat them to right a wrong that they did. And the reason why it's very similar to the stakes with horror is because thriller is a combination actually of action, horror, and crime. So there come those stakes in that it's both physical but also related to justice, and that it can be worse than just death. With love, obviously the stakes are love versus hate. And in my opinion, that doesn't necessarily have to be romantic love. It can also be friendship, like you have friendship stories. And then there's performance, which is accomplishment versus failure. So performance, it's sports stories or any other type of performance, like musical performances, or like the King's Speech. He has to have a speech performance, so that's also a performance that he has to either succeed in and accomplish, or fail at. So that's at stake. Western and Eastern. So Western and Eastern is more the type of setting, right? So, but the stakes are similar in that on the one hand you have the autonomic individual, so more freedom, or perhaps freedom is the more Western interpretation of it. And on the other hand, you have the subjugation to a larger system. So it's more individual versus, what's the word? Communal, in a sense. And with society, it's more about impotence versus power. So it might seem a bit similar to Western versus Eastern, but society is really more about tyranny. So there's a tyrannical system in place, at least for our protagonists. The system is tyrannical, and they experience impotence, right? They have no say over their own lives in one way, shape, or form, and they need to rise up against tyranny. So there's a form of rebellion to really seize power again. So those are the external content genres. The internal content genres are status, morality, and worldview. So status revolves around the stakes of success versus failure. So status in a lot of ways feels very similar to society, only it's more about our personal status, which isn't necessarily related to where we are in society. It can be, right? If we're upper class or lower class, and we're lower class and we want to move to upper class society, so that's a rise in status. But that rise in status doesn't have to involve us starting a rebellion, right? There are different ways that we can improve our status. And in that sense, status is much more internal feeling or internal thing, because it's based on how other people view us, but also how we view ourselves. Whereas with society, your place in the world is very much dependent on how the society functions and what your role within that society is. So morality is your basic good versus evil, or altruism versus selfishness type of story. And worldview is the immaturity versus sophistication. So this is very common with coming of age novels. So now that we know what genre is and what type of content genres there are, it's time to find our main content genre. Why? Well, as we've seen with the definition, a genre will help you categorize the main type of story your story is. And when you know what the main type of story is, there will be certain conventions and expectations related to that story, which we will talk about more in the next video. And that will help you identify whether you're actually meeting reader expectations or not. Because if you're not meeting reader expectations, it's likely that they'll feel that something's missing in your story, although they won't be able to pinpoint it exactly often. But it could lead to them, putting away the story, not finishing it, or leaving bad reviews, and all those things you don't want. So, the first step is to find your main content genre, which is, in other words, your main plot. So for commercial fiction, your main plot is external. And with literary fiction, most often the main plot is internal. So those are the big differences. That does not mean that as a commercial fiction author, you don't have an internal content genre, because you definitely pretty much always do want an internal content genre, because it's related to your character's arc throughout the story. But the internal genre functions more as a subplot. Yeah. So, in order for you to understand how to find your main plot in your manuscript, we'll have a look at how I'm going to find my main genre in my manuscript. So this is a synopsis of my story. It's a sequel, so some things will seem very strange, especially since you probably don't know the magic system I have, but you don't really need to know all the specifics in order to understand what I'm doing. So I'm just going to read it. So Nikki struggles with her new circumstances as her parents are now divorced and living apart, and Loreen is currently living inside her mind. However, she still rejects using a ritual to remove Loreen from her mind if it means wearing her bracelet, which is the object her power is stored in, as she's afraid of what Loreen might do. But when Nikki and Carter are confronted with Emily, a patient at the mental clinic she volunteers at, whose powers are running out of control, she has to make a choice. She puts on the bracelet to use her power to help Carter contain Emily's power, but when she feels Loreen is trying to reach Carter through their connection, she pulls away. Carter can't hold it, and Emily's power breaks through, causing a small earthquake. Emily is shaken, and Nikki's bracelet is now burned into her skin. Want or not, she has a power spec. Since Emily is unstable, Nikki suggests training her, even though Loreen warns her it's not going to be enough. In order to help Emily, Nikki makes a deal with Loreen to keep her in her mind if she helps her with Emily. So when the training indeed doesn't work, Carter, Dad, and Fred use a ritual to clear Emily's block so her powers can flow properly. Nikki is keeping watch and is told to run if it doesn't go up. However, the ritual isn't working because they don't have enough power, so Nikki uses her powers to help. It seems to work, but then Loreen jumps over to Emily. She controls Emily's powers and then knocks them all out. Nikki finds out Loreen's old mentor was actually Nikki's ancestor, so she figures Loreen wants revenge on their family. Nikki receives a call Emily is back at the facility, and when Nikki arrives at the facility to confront Loreen as Emily, she finds herself cornered when she, Carter, and Fred can't find a way to save Henry and Daisy to other potentials they found. Nikki chooses to give Loreen what she wants, her essence, which is another term for her soul, in a sense, and hopes Carter and Fred can fight Loreen when she's distracted. However, it doesn't work. Loreen takes her entire essence and mind within her and locks her there. She can see the fighting that had happened, and that Carter and Fred are wounded, that Henry and Daisy look horrified, and that her father has arrived screaming over her lifeless body. Nikki discovers she still has access to some of her powers within Emily's mind, controlled by Loreen, and she makes a plan. She uses her powers to subdue Loreen back to her original self, but an accomplice of her Loreen attacks Emily, and her powers are growing out of control as a result. Nikki works with Loreen, and together they work to break open Emily's block. They succeed, and Emily's powers flow through her again. All works out. Nikki gets transferred back into her body together with Loreen. Nikki now knows what she wants to do with her life and understands how she can use her powers to heal people through connection and sharing. She no longer runs away from her relationship. Carter and Fred start a new order under a different name, and they want to track down new potentials to teach them properly. And Lorraine stays with Nikki. So, now I have to decide for my story what's at stake, because when we know what's at stake, we can figure out what genre we're writing in. So, to figure this out, I look at the climactic event of my story. Here is where Nikki is confronting Lorraine. Because if Nikki loses, she can never return to her physical body and will be stuck to watch Lorraine tear the lives of her loved ones apart. So this is a fate worse than death. And as we've seen before, this means the story can either be thriller or horror. So the fate has more to do with losing her soul, because her soul was literally ripped out of her body, than that it has to do with justice. So the content genre is horror. Which sucks for me, because I actually wanted to write a thriller. Because like I said, this is a sequel. And the first one is a thriller, so I wanted the next one to be a thriller as well, so that's consistent. It can happen that you want to write in a certain genre, and then by the end of it, you realize you actually didn't write in that genre. Especially with thriller, because like I said, it's a combination of both action, horror, and crime. So when you're writing a thriller, it's possible that you lean more towards one of those three genres rather than combining them more fully. And in my instance, with a thriller, you need like an inciting crime. And I did have that, but I put it in the wrong place. So I put it in a past timeline that I added to the story, which meant that it wasn't really in the main plotline. So that was missing. So then when you've identified your main genre, and hopefully you found the one that you wanted, you can also identify your other subplots. So you don't have to identify them yet at this point, as you won't be looking that closely at them yet. That's more for later stages, once you figured out how you want your main plot to be laid out. But if you're curious what else you have to work with, you can definitely look at it. So how do you find your subplots? So first, internally, we look at what is internally at stake at the climax. So in my case, Nikki needs to reevaluate how she sees the world in order to succeed in bringing down Lorraine, because she needs to understand how we're all connected. So in this case, the subplot is worldview with coming of age, which is great because it's a young adult novel where coming of age is a very common thing. Then you usually also always have another external subplot, and for this we can look at what is externally at stake right after the climax, because those subplots often tend to be meshed with our main climax, if you're doing it correctly, because you kind of want all of the subplots that you've gathered to kind of merge at this climactic point, because that makes the most impactful climax. So it's either right after the climax, sometimes it's a little bit before, it depends a bit on how you've structured it. But in my case, it's Nikki's now open in her connections, and she has to choose whether she wants to continue her romantic relationship with Alex or not. So love is at stake here. So the external subplot I have is love, romantic. She chooses to be open with Alex. The minor external subplot that I also have is with her mother. Like, I have that more in the beginning, but it doesn't really come in fruition. Is that how you pronounce it? But it's not really currently prevalent, especially not in the climax. So if I do want it to be prevalent also throughout the storyline and to really influence the stakes, I can do that, but then I need to work it out in a bit more detail. So like I mentioned, I also have a past timeline. So what is externally at stake at that climax? So the past timeline I have is really about Lorraine. So she's the main protagonist in that timeline, not Nikki. So she's confronting what I call the three and the anomaly. If she loses there, they will steal her essence, which means that her soul is at stake. So again, this is a fate worse than death. And like I mentioned, the soul thing, so here it's the horror genre. Although now that I think about it again, it's also thriller in a way, because it's not just her soul that's at stake, but also a sense of justice for her, because she wants to bring the three to justice. So perhaps the past timeline actually is thriller. I will have to reevaluate that. Always surprises. And internally, what's at stake at the climax? So Lorraine has to decide how she'll defeat the three. If she chooses to subjugate them to the same fate, she's no better than they are, especially if she also sacrifices the anomaly. So what's at stake here is that whether she wins through evil, selfish means, or if she chooses to be good and altruistic. So the internal subplot here is morality. So go ahead and try to find the main plot in your story. If you're struggling or you're having some questions, feel free to send me a message or a comment, and I'll do my best to help you. If you'd like some more guidance with your developmental editing, I have a developmental editing guide that you can buy, and if you use the code YouTube Edits, you get it with a 60% discount when you click the link in the description. If you'd like some more tips on editing, you can subscribe for my free self-editing course, where you'll learn some more about the different editing stages and some tips and tricks on how you can perform these edits on your manuscripts yourself. And if you'd like some more tips, general tips on editing, self-editing, and some more information on the different editing stages, be sure to check out my other videos as well. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to stay updated for more content. And in the next video, we'll dive a bit deeper into our analysis, and we'll start with the conventions and expectations. The first one, probably the conventions, and then the next one, the expectations, otherwise they will probably be a bit too long. So I hope to see you with the next video. Thank you for watching.